Duncan Sheik had massive success right out of the gate with his self-titled debut album and its first single, Barely Breathing. Barely Breathing was released in mid-96, first to rock radio, and then later that year went on to pop and adult pop radio, where it found major success and eventually hit number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100, as well as going to number 19 on the adult contemporary charts, number 2 on the adult pop charts. It would go on to hit number 19 on the adult contemporary charts, number 2 on the adult pop charts, number 10 on the pop charts, and number 2 on the AAA charts. It would stay on the Billboard Hot 100 after peaking at number 16 for 55 weeks, which at the time I think was the 4th longest running single on that chart. And they also had a rule where after 50 weeks, a song would fall off if it would peak in the top 50, but then after 50 weeks, when it peaked outside of the top 50, it would be taken off the chart for some reason to make room for newer songs. So the second single from that album, She Runs Away, wasn't as successful. It just hit the adult pop charts on the lower end. And then there was a third single, Reasons for Living, which was only really successful as remixes on the dance charts. At the end of that album promotion cycle, Duncan Sheik would have a song included on the soundtrack to Great Expectations called Wishful Thinking, which would be released as a single, the first single from that soundtrack, which is fantastic. It as well did not fare that great. I think it only hit number 3 on the Bubbling Under Hot 100 charts, despite the fact that it's a fantastic song and I love it. So the self-titled Duncan Sheik debut album had a very soft and romantic acoustic vibe, beautiful songwriting, and absolutely gorgeous arrangements. Throughout 1997, Barely Breathing was all over the radio, and I myself loved hearing it. I didn't buy the album at first because I was hearing the song on the radio all the time, but I did have a poster flat of the first album here because I just thought he was really cute and I liked looking at it on my wall. I did eventually buy it. At one point in, I think, June of 1997, a friend of mine and I were going to go to a free Duncan Sheik concert that was being put on by 93.3 The Zone in Dallas, which was a station that I was in love with. And we got there, and unfortunately the age limit for the club was 18 and I was 17 at the time, so I could not get in. Luckily, I would eventually see him in concert a few years later. When his next album was coming out, he titled it Humming. It was preceded by this awesome EP called Humming Along, which had acoustic covers of Nick Drake's Riverman, Depeche Mode's Blasphemous Rumors, The Smiths' Reel Around the Fountain, and Orpheus by David Sylvain. Humming would also be preceded by the single Bite Your Tongue, which was an up-tempo rock song. Here's the UK single, or at least the European single, which had awesome bonus tracks, like a re-recording of In the Absence of Sun from his first album, as well as an acoustic version of one of my favorite tracks on the album, Varying Degrees of Con Artistry. When Bite Your Tongue was coming out and they were trying to promote it on the radio, I would call The Zone griping to them about not playing it enough, and that might not have helped it, but I just really wanted to hear Duncan Sheik on the radio, and so I had to call him and request it a lot, and they weren't playing it. When Humming finally did come out, it did not reach the heights that his previous gold-selling self-titled album did. It hit number 163 on the pop charts, and unfortunately kinda came and went. He had an appearance on 90210 in '98 where he performed Bite Your Tongue and Barely Breathing. The promo seems to have a modern mix of the song, and honestly, I can't tell the difference between the regular version and the modern mix. If y'all have these versions and know the difference, then please feel free to let me know what I'm missing. The songs on Humming are darker with much more elaborate arrangements. The lyrics are a lot darker and a little bit more pessimistic than his first album. It's dealing with feeling separated from the collective with songs like In Between and Rubbed Out. Rubbed Out was a song that first appeared on a live EP that came out around the time as his first album and was finally mixed and produced for the second album. I don't know if they recorded it for the first one and they just left it off or what, but it's a song that he had in his catalog from as far back as his first album. There's also songs that deal with ego and the id, like Nothing Special, and my personal favorite on the album, Everyone Everywhere, which is this beautiful 3/4 time song that sounds like it's this uplifting song, and it could be, but once you are singing the lyrics, you realize that it's kind of bitter. And there was an interview that Duncan Sheik did maybe, I don't know, 10 or 15 years after this album came out, where he didn't specify Humming by name, but he said he kind of regretted his darker lyrics earlier in his career that might have been more pessimistic, and I don't know the exact words he used, but I think that he ended up feeling that some of the themes of this album were a little darker than he wanted to go. But I mean, that's what happens when you're a songwriter. You have no control sometimes over the kind of songs that need to come out. I have a song that I wrote called Isolation that I ignored for a couple of years until, I mean, basically it was burning holes in my mind, and I had to write it and finish it, and I love it. It came out to be a good song. He also has more tender songs like the very romantic Alibi, as well as a song called That Says It All, which was the second single. And I mean, I think there are other songs that would have made a better second single from this album as well, but it is kind of a tribute where he's referencing Nick Drake and Jimi Hendrix and Bob Dylan and John Lennon. It's a little bit of a sausage factory, but what are you gonna do? A song that I mentioned a bit ago from the Bite Your Tongue single, Varying Degrees of Con Artistry, is an absolutely gorgeous ballad, basically about con artists, and really shows Duncan Sheik's exquisite way of characterizing the minutiae of daily lives. And I think that's also what helped him go on to be a brilliant composer for Broadway and other musicals. There's also a beautiful ballad called A Body Goes Down, which is a tribute to Jeff Buckley, and I think it was also included in a tribute CD for Jeff Buckley. Gorgeous song, very sad, and there are several artists who I love that were mourning Jeff Buckley, and I didn't know who he was until probably 97. I think I learned who he was, and I really didn't get into him until probably 99, 2000 myself, because Grace is a really amazing album, and I understand why many people fell in love with it and were incredibly sad when Jeff Buckley passed. Both Duncan's first album and Humming were produced by Rupert Hine, which had massive success with bands like Tina Turner, Better Be Good to Me, as well as most of the Fixes catalog from the 80s and 90s. He also produced a lot of Howard Johnson songs, including What Is Love, Things Can Only Get Better, No One Is to Blame. He's also worked with Stevie Nicks and Rush, including Roll the Bones, and the album that came out before that, which I don't remember what it was. And he also produced Katie Sagle's album, Well, who is a brilliant actress, or the Peggy Bundy and has also made a name for herself all through the last few decades. She tried a music career, and the album's worth listening to. I don't own it, but every now and again I like listening to it just because it's really interesting. It's an interesting record, but I'm getting off track. Rupert Hine also produced an album from an artist that I love called Noah, and the album is Calling. She's an Israeli artist and put out a couple of English language albums, including Calling, and it's definitely one of my favorites. I'll probably be doing a video on that at some point in the future. He would also go on to produce Suzanne Vega's album, Songs in Red and Gray. Duncan Sheik would go on to collaborate with Suzanne Vega as well for Carson McCullers Talks About Love, which they co-wrote most of the songs from that, and it was I guess a one-man show that Suzanne Vega did. I'm not really sure of the entire story. It might be worth looking up if you're into that, but back to humming. Duncan would go on to record more contemporary albums as well as non-contemporary albums like Whisper House, which was a play that he wrote most of the music on, which was about ghosts, basically. He would also put out an album called Phantom Moon, which was the follow-up to Humming, and that's actually the tour that I was able to see Duncan Sheik at Bass Hall in 2001. And coincidentally, although he's not America's favorite person right now, I was sitting behind Matthew Perry, and I think Elizabeth Hurley as well, while they were in town shooting their movie. So to wrap up, I really hope that one of these days they'll put this album out on vinyl as well, because it's just a gorgeous listen, and to this day it's my favorite Duncan Sheik album, and I would like a lot more people to engage in it and listen to it and check it out if you get a chance. It's available on all the streaming services, and you can download it or find it somewhere at Half Price Books or a record store. And I'll see y'all soon.